Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Second Chance Hour, where today I'm interviewing Ian Bick. And he's an interesting guy who has a lot of differences from a lot of the people who were formerly justice involved that I talked to. So, introducing Ian. Hey, Ian, how are you
Good.
doing?
Good. How you doing, Jesse? Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. So, like I said, you have a very different presence on social media than most of the people who've been incarcerated. Most people are showing off their tattoos or their muscles or telling war stories or still kind of bragging about what they're doing. And you've taken a completely different tack. Like you've talked about literally saying, hey, I don't want to get into altercation. So I'd rather basically hire somebody to like deal with my problems for me. You've taken this different tack. And how do you feel like that reflects your experience before prison?
The experience before prison, I mean, I was very not confrontational at all. Like I got myself into so much trouble like dealing with like biker gangs and like drug dealers and taking money from people I shouldn't have been taking money from. And I was just always like so not confrontational. Like I would always avoid situations when people were calling me asking where their money was. I would put my phone on airplane mode or do not disturb. You should have seen how many contacts I had on the block list on my phone. It was crazy. So I was just like very avoidant. So I think that kind of transpired or transferred into when I was in prison and I saw like guys that were looking to kind of like take advantage of me and my situation and what I was doing. I deflected into trying to not confront it on my own, which I guess now looking back on it turned it into a funny story. But I think had I like if I was the person I am today, I wouldn't be that way. I guess I would more tackle it head on and figure it out, rather than hiding behind other people. But that definitely contributed to like my past in that way.
But so what I find funny about it is I have a business friend, kind of a business mentor, and she's watched a couple of your videos and she was like, he's smart, like he gets it. Like that's what somebody with the business mindset would do. They wouldn't waste their time getting into their ego and trying to prove who they are. They would take care of business, whatever they needed to, and they'd move on to the next thing. And she said that's why she would invest in you if you were running a business today, which I just thought was bizarre. So it shows like the counter of what everybody in prison says, but the successful people out here in the world are kind of commenting saying, hey, that's what I would do, or that's what makes the most sense.
Yeah, I feel like the successful people have a lot to lose. So like when you find yourself like my mindset then was okay, like I'm healthy, like I want to get home. My main what I was in like fight and survival mode. So it was like my focus was getting home and surviving because I was this young kid not knowing what to expect in prison. This is the first couple months. I don't know how dangerous it could actually get. Regardless if I was at a low or at a camp or whatever, I didn't know. It was a new situation for me. So my priority was just surviving. So I did what I had to do to survive. And I think that average person, that has a lot to lose in that scenario is going to do the same thing.
And like I said, so you have a different background. A lot of the people that I've talked to grew up in rough neighborhoods, were dealing with crime and drugs and kind of living that life to begin with. But that wasn't your background, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up in a good family, middle class family. We lived in like a private Jewish community. My dad's side of the family's Jewish. We lived on a lake. It was like a gated community. We took family vacations. We went on trips, and we went to private school, Montessori school, for a few years. And it was like not your typical lifestyle for some of the guys that I was in prison with.
So for the people who don't know your story, like how do you get from there, from the gated community in the Montessori school to federal prison?
Essentially, well, that story could go on for hours, but in a nutshell, I started, throwing these parties for my friends, and really the whole thing throughout my story is I was always driven by being the popular kid and wanting to be liked and chasing, that gratification or whatnot that I wanted to be like this whiz popular entrepreneur kid, and that snowballed into me doing these like club nights and throwing bigger events, which led me to wanting to raise funding for this business and get way in over my head into like this concert business of booking these giant rap stars and EDM stars. And when all those, concerts and business ventures fail, essentially, I lie to cover up the losses. And that's where like the fraud aspect of my whole case, takes effect because I start lying. And while I'm lying to investors, I'm taking more money in and to try to make up for it. And it was always with like the best intentions. It was never to like try to steal or scam anyone. It was just to try to like cover up the losses because I didn't want to be different. Like I didn't want to come off as that failure. So I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that. And eventually it caught up to me where like the FBI got involved and started investigating, and I went to trial and ultimately was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison in 2016 when I was 21 years old.
So I really appreciate your vulnerability there. I did an interview with Matt recently, and he said the same thing. He said, "I think this all stems from not feeling good enough and trying to impress my father and my deep insecurities." And a lot of people that I talk to, especially who've been in prison, don't get that deep. They're not either willing or able to say, "Hey, this is where I think that came from. This came from me feeling like I wasn't good enough." But the people who are honest, that's a common theme that I hear. So I appreciate your vulnerability. But my question is, where did you find people to get in a big enough debt? Like if I were to go look for money right now to throw a concert, I don't know where I would turn or who I would ask for $10,000 or $100,000. How did you make those connections as a teenager?
I think in my case, what had happened was I created a super successful business that
Okay.
people gravitated towards. So my business was renting these nightclubs or local venues and throwing parties, and I did this without investors because I had a job at the time, or my dad helped me, and I was making a $10,000 profit a month essentially for multiple months at 16 years old. And I would have some of my friends that were looking to make money like invest into it by giving me 200 or $300 or $400, and I would give them a return. So they would like double their money, and they didn't really have to do anything. They just like help promote, hand out flyers, whatnot. So when it came time to raise serious money, like thousands of dollars from people, I already had like that image of success built up. People looked at me as like the whiz kid. So had I just like been a random kid at high school looking to raise money for like a business of like that had never even been a proven concept, I think it would have been a lot harder. But because I was already super successful in my field at a very young age, people were looking at me as like that next Mark Zuckerberg type or whatever for my field and my industry at that time period.
Okay. Because I think about it like when I do proposals, I need a pitch deck and I need a selling point and I need to sit down and I need to have this like whole presentation. Was that how it was for you at 16? Or did you just walk into a room full of bikers and be like, "Hey guys, want to throw a party?" Like, what did it look like?
So I was this 16-year-old kid, nerdy, glasses, a little chubby, walking around my high school with, I had business cards that said CEO. We called ourselves This Is Where It's At Entertainment. I had business cards and I printed out these one-page investment contracts from LegalZoom or RocketLawyer.com, edited it to fit my business. And I was wearing a suit and tie to school, and I had this briefcase, and I just walk around and I'd pitch to whoever. I said, "Listen, I had this idea for this concert. We wanted to do Wiz Khalifa," and I was smart enough to map out like the spreadsheet, like what anyone does for their business. I did it in Excel and mapped out what the expenses would be, what the potential profit if we sold X amount of tickets, and if they invested, to simplify the numbers, if they invested $10,000 and the show cost $100,000, they would get 10% of profits of the show after their initial investment was paid back from ticket sales. So that would be my pitch. And a lot of people were like, they knew the name was Khalifa, so they wanted to get involved in that. They wanted to meet him, and they knew that my party promoting business was already making money.
Okay. But then how did it go from kids in your school to, like you're saying, bikers and people that you shouldn't have gotten involved in? Like, how did that progress? You owned a
So the
nightclub, for God's sake.
so the bikers and stuff progressed. Like I ended up owning a nightclub. By the time I was 18, I had taken over the club that I was promoting at. I called it Sky Bar, invested like $100,000 into it, and the thing flopped. After 6 months it folded, and then while my whole business was folding, like with the investors and the FBI started investigating, that's when I got the idea to open up this big area called, Tuxedo Junction, which was the three rooms to this nightclub combined together. And through that nightclub business is when I started meeting other promoters that, were in gangs or in bikers, or they were just like associated. There was shade in that world. You meet a lot of shady people. So when I was running out of money from investors or whatever, and I needed to make like payments to them, I started asking around like, "Hey, can I borrow money? Can I do this?" And they're all looking to wash their money and launder it at a high interest rate. And that's just kind of how like it felt that it was folded. It was all out of desperation.
Okay. When you talk about, so how did the FBI get involved? Like you were talking about doing transfers and borrowing money to pay other people, but how did the FBI get the wind of you in the first place?
It was January 2014, and one of my investors that had $500,000 into our company wasn't getting his returns. The concerts all failed by this point, and I'm 18 years old, and he goes to the local police department. And now keep in mind, when an investor goes to a local police department saying he's out $250,000, they're all thinking that the dollar amount's going to be way more. Like, how could there only just be one investor for 250,000? There's got to be multiple. So the local police start investigating, and we never really got the full story, but we've heard like rumors and whatever that like the local detectives pushed it up to the state level. They declined to like prosecute it. Had it been like a state level case, I probably just would have got like a probation, or it would have been settled on a civil level. But someone had the power and the connections to escalate it up to the FBI. The U.S. attorney took the case, and from that point, they were just like super persistent about jail time. That's why I went to trial and didn't take a plea deal, because they never wanted to offer a deal that didn't involve jail time. Keep in mind, I'm 18 years old, no criminal record or anything like that. And I had acknowledged that I owed the money. We were just not acknowledging that it was intentional fraud, which is like a component of wire fraud.
Sure. Well, and because when I think about it, like if I invest money in something, that company fails, I'm not going to call the police. Like if some CEO makes a dumb decision, that's on me for investing in them. So even though I know you're saying with wire fraud there was something illegal happening, it seems surprising to me that the investors felt justified in going to the police rather than maybe seeking a civil response or some kind of non-criminal response to this. It just seems out of proportion.
Well, it definitely seems out of proportion, but that was on me because I was lying and not telling them the truth
Okay.
that it made money. So that's where their frustration came. Had I sat with them and said, here's all the expenses, here's exactly what happened, it screwed up, I lied, this and that, I probably could have avoided them going to the police. We could have worked something out, got everyone together, because it's not a lot of people. We're not talking hundreds of people. We're talking like 10 or 15 individuals at most. So I could have worked that out, but instead I hid behind a lawyer who threw gasoline on the fire by sending everyone letters saying I wasn't talking to them anymore, and the company's bankrupt and we're analyzing if you're owed any money. So that just pissed everyone off. Instead of like calling everyone into a room and saying, hey, this is what happened, we made a mistake, and they probably never would have went to the police. But because I was being avoidant and not handling it directly on and saying, hey, like this is what happened and this is when we could get your money, they decide to go that avenue. Because at that point, they didn't know what to believe, and they thought, hey, the concerts all happened, he's probably just hiding the money and screwing us.
Okay. Well, and what I appreciate is every time somebody can draw a lesson from an experience. And one of the things you talked about was, you hid behind a lawyer, or you were afraid of conflict for most of your life, but now you would do things differently. You would face it head on. I think it's admirable that you can say, okay, this was my behavior. This is how it's contributed to my decline. This is how it, caused harm for these other people. And this is what I would do differently. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, because you went to federal prison we didn't serve the whole 3 years, right? What was the total you ended up serving?
I ended up doing, I think, 27 months inside, like 3 or 4 months halfway house time, and then a year home confinement, and then another 2 years supervised release.
Okay. And what was your experience as kind of gated community kid going into federal prison? Like you said, you didn't know what to expect. What did you find once you kind of like got to learn the ropes?
So when I was first there, it was like the real prison setting, like in the detention centers in the federal system, like you're locked in your cell and there's certain movements, this and that. But as my experience progressed, I realized like it's nothing they talk about on TV. It's not like 60 days in, like it was open dorms. There was a lot of wandering around. Like when I remember the first time I saw a cell phone for the first time, I had to like double look back. I'm like, is this dude on a cell phone? Because this is just like not the stuff that people were talking about at the time. Orange is the New Black had like just came out, which was like the first TV show to really show what like a federal prison was. And it was just like this whole new world. And then, after a year of being in the low, I made it down to a camp level. And that's just like a whole different world. Like I remember growing up, they would call it like Club Fed and the country club of prisons and this and that. And that's what it literally is. There's no fence. There's 120 guys. Most of them are there for white collar offenses. There's tennis courts, bocce ball courts, softball fields, a track. Guys are running through the woods to go, hang out with their wives and bring back McDonald's, sushi, pizza, it's crazy. It's a whole different experience. It's a very low guard to inmate ratio. And it's just something like I didn't even experience before. I think the other thing I didn't really analyze was that there's not really a rehabilitation factor in prison. There was no help. Like if I was looking to get help and trying to figure out like this is what I need to do or this is what I want to succeed, it's all like fluff. Like they have the programs in place, but they're not helping you get to that. Like it's good. Prison, I guess, is set up for the individual that doesn't have a GED or anything like that and is looking to advance on that level, but it's not helpful to someone that was, I guess, more on my level and looking to rehabilitate in that sense. And I know there's programs in the federal system for like alcoholism and drug addiction and whatnot, and those are programs. I personally never went through those programs, but I've heard that they're decent in that regard. But there's other than that, there's not much other programming, and the staff just could give two shits about you. The majority of the staff.
I mean, that sounds a lot like Virginia State Prison. I think it's pretty much the same everywhere. And I'm always interested in the culture of those kind of club-fed prisons. One, because I lived with a serial killer in state prison, and he had previously been at one of those. And I was like, how were you there when you had a detainer to go to state prison? He was like, I don't know. But so he was chilling, and he was out in Vegas, and he said the most common contraband item seized was chips from the casinos, because guys would sneak out, gamble, and then come in with their winnings. And it was like, having been in like a lockdown prison with 3 fences and gun towers, I was like, how do you sneak out and go gamble? It just blew my mind. But one of the things Matt said that surprised me so much is that at those lower level prisons, everybody talked about the code and nobody wanted to snitch. He said everybody was telling on each other. Everybody was getting information from somebody else to then go back to court and get their sentence reduced. And he said it was on the regular that someone would go back, get somebody else in trouble. That guy would get mad and then go up to another level. But because it was a camp and because it was so sweet and had sushi and cell phones, nobody wanted to do anything. So everybody was kind of telling without consequences. Did you see that kind of white collar, like, screw everybody else, I'm getting out of here attitude?
I mean, I wasn't at like the detention centers long enough to see that. Like I knew it happened. Like people are looking, because at that point when you're in the detention centers, you're not sentenced yet, so you're looking to advance your agenda whichever way possible. But when you get to the lows in the camps, people are snitching on each other all the time to advance like their prison experience, like get a better bunk or get a different job or be in with the counselor to do this. At that point, once you're already sentenced, it's not like you're trying to get reduced time, unless they have information of someone committing a new crime. I didn't really see necessarily that, but you do see a lot of snitching on people with cell phones, because that knocks out, like if you snitch on someone that's selling cell phone time and you're trying to sell cell phone time, you snitch them out, you take them off the chessboard, and then that helps your cause. So you see a lot of that in the lows in the camps.
Well, I think about people who've committed white collar crimes who may have come from more like opportunity or more money. I remember watching a guy get set up with a cell phone because somebody else wanted his job because they could sell drugs on the yard. They literally planted $1,000, $1,500 cell phone in his box so they could find it, so he could lose his job and this guy could get it. I was thinking, like, that is a heavy business investment in snitching. That's not just like, yo, I'm going to tell you something. Like, I'm willing to invest 1,500 because I think I'm going to get a 10 times. It just blew my mind because I was so used to people being in poverty that when somebody showed up who had the money and the scruples or lack of scruples to do that, just really surprised me. So do you feel like it was that kind of dog eat dog thing in the white collar place?
Oh, absolutely. Like a room would get raided and guys are very quick to throw a phone onto someone else's bed, because in that point it's your personal space. So if the phone is found on so and so's bed, that person's getting the charge. It's not like the whole room's getting the charge for that. So you would see a ton of that. You would see like everyone like it's prison. Everyone's kind of looking out for themselves. Like no one's really your friend. Obviously you develop friendships and relationships, but at the end of the day you have to like look out for yourself, because you don't know what someone's agenda is, especially these guys you just meet and they're trying to make it look like you're their friend, but they're the first person to throw you under really quick. I would always be making sure I'm like checking my bed, this and that, because someone could just like slip something in your laundry bag that's hanging on the bed during a raid. You just don't know. I remember on days, because they would do these like quarterly unit raids,
Mhm.
where they would just empty the whole unit out and search everything, tear everything apart. I was always like the last person out of my room to make sure like no one was just like slipping something onto my bed, because on those surprise raids, everyone's throwing shit everywhere. So you just want to be careful in those scenarios.
So you talked about everybody being out for themselves. Do you have any friends you still have from your time in federal prison?
Yeah, I have a couple good ones. Mostly, I have a one that's actually still in prison at the low security prison I was at. He's getting out soon. Um, but most of the other guys that I'm like close with now came from the camp, and a lot of people have reached out that I've been in prison with since I've been becoming like well known on social media. I get a lot of friend requests from old people I was in prison with, people reaching out. Actually, Billy Johnson, who was on my podcast, he has a successful hot sauce company now. He he was just on my podcast and we keep in touch regularly. So we see a lot of guys like that.
Very cool. So you did the 27 months and then you had to do, you said halfway house time and then home confinement. So what does your life look like after prison? And I mean, you still owe people money. Like you got bikers who are mad at you. Like, what does it feel like getting out as a kid still? I mean, you're still in your early 20s.
Yeah, I got out, I think when I was like 23 or 24. And obviously I wanted to get back in the nightclub business. I feel like I felt at the time that was like my redemption story. I had read like the Wolf of Wall Street books. I was like very gung ho about getting like a movie or a book written about me. And then, not even a couple months in, I realized that wasn't realistic at the time and it wasn't going to happen as fast as I wanted it to. So I ended up going back to my old job that I had before prison while I was running the nightclub, which was at Whole Foods. And I got into very much like a corporate grind mindset. Like I was so determined to work my way up all the way to the top. I started as like a hot bar cook making, $15 an hour. And by the time I eventually left Whole Foods last August, I was making $32 an hour as like this felon that was, worked his way up in management. And just like, it was important to me to like break through all those like stigmas of like not being able to find work as a felon and this and that, and just like prove people wrong. And because I've always had like a really good work ethic. And so that was super important to me. And I did documentaries along the way. Like I did the HBO documentary, I did a Vice documentary, and I did these exciting projects. And then, last August, I woke up and I was like, I'm 27 years old. I don't have a family yet. I don't have kids to support. Like is this really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? Like, yes, Whole Foods is a great, stable job, but I didn't have like that passion and that flame that I had when I was running tuxedos, running the nightclub.
Mm-hmm.
So I put my 2 weeks in right away, and I started jumping into this world of social media. And, a couple months later, I met you. We met up in the city for the first time, and then it's been like a grind ever since. I don't think I've taken like a full day off since I started this whole journey. And I've been able to everything's about timing in life. Like had I came up with this idea to get into social media when I was on probation, I think there would have been some challenges because I wasn't permitted to run a business again. Just like interacting with other people that are felons would have been an issue, and just the traveling like to the studio to New York City, everything like that. But I got out 4 years ago now. People run into me or talk to me now and they're like, "Oh, did you just get out of prison? Like you're just starting to get out there with social media." And I'm like, "No, I've been out this whole time. I've just, I had other priorities before." And Whole Foods allowed me to like rebuild a good life, get an apartment, rebuild my credit, do all these great things. And, I didn't have that flame and desire and passion in me. And now I'm really passionate about this. I'm super passionate about like the podcast and the cooking show and like everything we have going on, like this brand that I've been able to build at a really fast pace.
It's amazing. So you said you put in your 2 weeks notice before you even started doing social media?
So last July, my friend had told me, they were like, he's been telling me for years, he's a good friend of mine, you need to go on TikTok and start telling your story. And I was like, yeah, but everyone's on TikTok. Like I didn't really like watching TikToks. I don't understand TikTok. I was very anti TikTok. And then I started posting on Instagram 5 nights a week doing like this story time. And I wasn't really getting much growth. Like I got 20,000 views on a couple of them, but I wasn't making money and it was starting to die out fast. So I switched to TikTok and I start posting every day. And then I move that to 3 times a day. And then I start doing reply to video comments. And then my page starts exploding. I get like 5,000 followers in the first month. And this is end of July, early August of last year. And a casting producer for MTV reaches out and says, "Hey, I saw," because at this point I had a couple viral videos that had done like 1 million or 2 million views. So I had an MTV producer reach out and they were like, "Hey, we'd love to have you interview on the show. Like you have a good story." It was like some dating show. And so I do this, a dating show overseas. I'd have to be out of the country for 3 months. They would pay me this and that. And I go very far along in the process. And that propelled me. That was a scenario that propelled me to quit my job. Because I was I figured, okay, like if it's all going to work out, if this is what fate wants for me, then I have to quit the job anyways. Sure. So I put in my 2 weeks. Now, a rational person probably would have said, I'm going to wait till I see some type of contract or paperwork or this and that. but I just did it. And I just figured if it didn't work out, then, life had other plans or I could always go back. And I never heard back from them. And I just doubled down on social media and, just working for my dad and doing Uber part time, to pay the bills until I could start generating revenue. And I started generating real revenue through social media by like December or November, end of November. It started to flow in. But it was just like a grind every day. Like, what the social media life is. You're one of the few creators that post religiously on the same times, the same amount of videos every single day across all platforms. But that's what it takes to grow your pages.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I loved when I met you in New York. You said, "All right, I'm done now. I'm going to go drive an Uber." Like you were willing to do whatever it takes. So many people want to like say, oh, they want to like pretend to have money they don't have, or they want to be too proud. You were just like, no, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get ahead. I'm going to try to catch up. And one of the things you told me that, because I think there was this kind of question, a lot of people get out of prison and they have this like survivor's guilt, and they feel like they need to change the system, or they need to save everybody's inside, or they have a lot of anger. You said your principal motivation was to pay back the people that you owed. And that just seems so simple and straightforward. Yet I don't hear a lot of people say that, hey, that's my goal getting out.
Yeah, I mean, that's my redemption story. Like, that's what I have. Like, what else do I have to fight for? Like, I screwed this whole thing up and like I'm in debt. I think when like say the average person that goes to college or has credit card debt or whatever, their goal is always to get back to zero and pay it off. So that's my concept. Like, I have this debt from the past and it's not an insurmountable amount of money. You look at guys that owe millions of dollars, Jordan Belfort, $100 million, like all these people, millions and millions. My debt is less than $500,000. That's an obtainable sum. That's like one TV deal. That's one book deal. That's one whatever. I mean, like there's YouTube people in our field making $15,000, $20,000 a month. So that's not a far off sum to do. Obviously, like by me quitting my job and starting my business, I go behind a few steps because I have to incur more debt to like build this thing. But I think long term potential, if I can make this work, because I'm in a field right now where I don't need investors, I'm not taking on investors, I'm riding on me. Like I'm not counting on someone else to give me money so I can do an interview with someone. Like it's me, it's the shirt off my back. Like I'm putting in the work, I'm doing what I have to do and grinding it out to make that happen. And I just have to like, if I have to strip certain luxuries away in my life, like to make it happen, like, do I need to downsize on the car? Do I need to sublease my apartment and live on my parents' couch for a few weeks? Like I'm in that mindset like I had when I was running the club, like do whatever it takes to make it work. Just the only difference is now I'm not depending on other people and going to like those extreme lengths to do it. I'm just doing it more in like a straight and narrow route and just like grinding it out to get there.
And that's one of the big things that I saw is like when I've seen the old videos of you running your club, like you said, you were kind of this like pudgy, just like unhappy looking kid. And now you're religious about exercise. Like when we were out in Houston together, we went to the gym together, we went for a run. You post pictures all the time on Instagram of you working out. Do you feel like exercise or the routine you started in prison has helped you kind of get the discipline you need to keep going forward?
Yeah, I definitely think that fitness is like such a big thing for me now. I did get lazy like during COVID and I fell off and I got super comfortable. I was in a relationship and I was getting comfortable and I just got lazy. And I think fitness keeps me grounded. I just started boxing, so I'm training like 2 times a day now. Because that's like another avenue I want to explore, like celebrity fighting. Like that could be like a title thing. Like I saw like Billy McFarland from Firefest is getting into MMA. So like 6 months from now, maybe I challenge him and we do something good for charity, or like I just want to have that option there, but it's also good for my mental health too. Like that's like
Sure.
I'm on work mode all the time. I've been putting a back burner on like relationships right now, on things that I may have enjoyed or was chasing before, because I need to be so focused on this because I'm like right on the verge of it like working off. Like I think it would be different if I did the social media thing and I got no views, there's no consistent growth. I put money into the podcast and we're not getting any views on YouTube. I think that would be a lot worse. But now we have a clear message, which is different from a lot of other creators, and there's no hate towards them. Everyone has their own separate field and their niche and whatever. And I think I found mine, and I have like this inspirational arc to the stories we tell. Like I'm very hesitant to see who I bring on the podcast because they need to
Sure.
have a success story at the end of it. There needs to be that motivation. And I think, as you know, like the motivational stories aren't necessarily a seller on on YouTube, but hearing their craziness and then bringing in that inspirational arc at the end, I think that's good. And that gives us like that different variation of content that's a lot different than other prison creators.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's been frustrating for me, and I think probably for everybody in the field, is if you tell a heartwarming or successful story, you get half or a quarter of the views of somebody telling some crazy thing about a guard throwing somebody off a tier, or somebody getting assaulted. And it's frustrating when we're trying to talk about rehabilitation and a narrative of change, or the arc of change, and we don't get the engagement. But at the same time, I think it reaches sometimes the people that it really needs to reach, and that's what I think about as far as engagement is. I may not get nearly as many views on a video that's really heartfelt and important to me, but I get a lot of engagement back, and I get a lot of DMs, and I get a lot of people saying, "Hey, this means a lot to me. Like, this is important." So I just I admire the fact that you're choosing to highlight the positive stories rather than the salacious or the kind of like outrageous ones that may get the views, but leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth and probably make it harder for other people to really get their second chance or start over.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been like a motivational, inspirational person. Like in the car or in the shower, I'm listening to like a motivational speech on YouTube. Like that's what I enjoy listening to. And I just love that arc because I think that's a big part to my story. Like I want people to like look at my thing, know my fuck ups, and then look at it and be like, well, he was able to dig himself out of that. So it's important for me to include that into my podcast because that's who I am as a person. Like everything that drives me, like my work ethic, everything is based on like that motivation factor because I'm just like that determined person. So I think like that reflects in the podcast. And then obviously like the cooking show and stuff, like that's for entertainment. And like I have a funny personality, so that's where like that all fits in. But I've really started to evolve, I think, as a creator and what I'm doing, like to be taken seriously in this field. Like it's gone from just making these selfie videos in the car, which are great, to now getting like on this professional field where I could compete with like some big podcasts because we're sending a good message. We're doing it on a professional level and we're getting the downloads and the people. Like I get messages all throughout the day. Hey, Ian, I'm going through this. Like you really inspired me to change my life, or this story resonated with me, or I'm going through this. And I try my best to respond to people, as I know you do too, because not a lot of creators are taking the time to respond to people. So it's super important for me as a creator to interact with people, to like comments, to engage with people, because that's what builds the community around it. And it's good to see like these people that are resonating with the story, knowing that we're breaking through on that level. And that's why I like with like my podcast, you don't have to go to prison to relate to what we're putting out. It's you could be going through a breakup, a divorce, a job loss, and see someone like you or JD or myself who have screwed up, gone to prison, come out and have been able to change our lives. That will motivate you to go to the gym. That will motivate you to reapply to a job. That will motivate you to go back out in the dating field, because if individuals like that can go through a shitty situation, then they can make it through whatever they're going through.
I love that. So do you want to talk about what you're doing, your social media platforms, as well as any big projects you have coming up or announcements?
So basically my website is just ianbick.com, and that links to everything. It has like the most recent podcast. It has the audio streaming sites that we're on. It has the latest cook-off episode. Right now, we're just focused on getting guests for the podcast. Like if anyone has a good story, reach out to us on our website. We have a couple really cool collabs coming up. JD's coming back again this week. We're going to do like a part 2 interview. We're going to film more cook-offs. We're going to gear up to work with Larry Lawton next month.
Okay.
We have a couple different show ideas. And then I'm starting to like dive into the public speaking realm. I'm doing like that speaking talk in Pensacola in 2 weeks, which I'm excited about. Get some good content for that. And I think now like I have a clear message because it shows, I think my story showcases the how to succeed like after prison part. And it shows like the struggles, because I think I can really talk about that, of how there was no system in place. Like the system's designed for you to fail even after prison. And I think for me to be able to push through that, I can try to create like some change in that realm, because I could show what and communicate like what the struggles were, what exactly happened, and how it needs to be fixed. So more people could be successful in that realm. So I have that we're working on. Lewis, who we just interviewed, Lewis L. Reed, has been like a great connection. He's going to help me, start emerging into different routes, because I feel like that's the last component to like my whole brand that I haven't really dove in yet. Like I see the work you do and stuff, and like that's the type of stuff that I'd love to do. And like those are the type of things like I know, certain people get paid for it and whatnot, but I feel like that's how I could give back. Like I'd love to, because I'm not in the point where I could like raise money and give back on that sense, but I can give my time. So I think that's like an area I want to focus on in the coming months as I get bigger and I have more of an influence.
That's awesome. And actually, one of these times, I would love if you're ever down this way, if we could get you down to Charlottesville, for you to come into the juvenile center, because a lot of times what we see is this failure of imagination in these kids who say, "Hey, I'm going to get out. Where am I going to go? Like, what am I going to do? Like, change oil for $12 an hour. I'm going to work at Wendy's for $12 an hour. Like, how can I do?" And your story about, hey, like this is how I got a job and worked my way to the top to where I was making $100,000 a year, which I think would be really kind of inspirational to them. And also, hey, here's how I went out on my own, and here's how I decided I wanted more, and I'm willing to do that. I think they need more stories like that. And I would love if you're ever down this way to have you come into the center and just share your story, because I think the kids would probably initially be like, who the F is this guy? But then once you start selling your story, it'd be like, man, that's cool. Like, that's what I want. Because a lot of times they lack role models they can really relate to, who can share how they made it from, where they were to where they are now. So I think that would be great.
Yeah, and that I'd love to, man. Like that's what I want to get into because I feel like I can relate more because not only do I still look young, but like my story was based at that young age. And there's so many people that are like everyone's like their parents are like the path for you is college. And I think more people need to know that there is a path out there that's not college. And people also need to know the dangers of not getting the proper guidance if they do choose that path. So I think my story showcases and brings it full circle of the failures, the successes, what to do, what not to do, and how you can rebound from that. And I think that's what my kind of like story stands for. And I can attest to that.
Well, I love that. Well, thank you, Ian. Thank you for being
Thank you,
here.
man.
Everybody check out ianbick.com, check out his podcast, check out YouTube, and hope you have a wonderful day.
You too, Jesse. Thank you.